Today, though, we are delighted to have Harry Bolick, who will discuss his new book, Mississippi Fiddle Tunes and Songs from the 1930s, published by the University Press of Mississippi. The Department of Archives and History and UPM work closely together on many projects. We are happy, in fact, to be able to feature many of their authors in this series. Here to say a few words about this book and Harry Bolick is Craig Gill, Assistant Director and Editor-in-Chief at University Press of Mississippi.
The key statement in what Chris just said was a few words, because you're only not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to Harry. And I think it's at least a first for me, and it may be a first for this room, that we're going to have a performance as well as a discussion about the book. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also very excited about this book. This is an example of a project that exists because of a fantastic author, but also exists because of this building. The work that Harry did, there are over 300 tunes in this book, and the work that he did in finding and preserving this material was made possible because of the work that he did in this building and in the archives. So this is a great example of the University Press and the Mississippi Department of Archives and History and a very, very dedicated author working together to create something. Harry Bolick is, well, he currently lives in New York, but he is born in Mississippi. So he is a native Mississippian who has been learning, playing, recording, and teaching Mississippi fiddle tunes for 30 years now. He's the guy when it comes to Mississippi fiddle tunes, and hence the author of the book. I think we're in for a real treat today, and I thank you all for being here. As always, I thank Chris and Archives and History. And also, we want to sell some books. Our friends from Lemuria are here. And then Harry will also be signing and performing at Lemuria this afternoon at 5:30. 5:30. That's an author who knows what he's doing. So thank you all again, and Harry, please step up.
Thank you, Craig. Before we even get started, I really appreciate the introduction, but being the guy is heavy billing. There are many people in this state who play this music and love it and help preserve it. I just was willing to drive back and forth to New York to do my little bit. I'm here out of raw curiosity, basically. Years ago, let's do this in order. 1987, the Mississippi Department of Archives and History put out an LP called Great Big Yam Taters. There's now a festival in Natchez named after the same fiddle tune and the same recording. We were all there this weekend playing tunes. I bought the record when it came out and learned some of the tunes, and I was very proud of it because I am from Mississippi and I keep coming back to those tunes. When I retired, I had a little time on my hands, and I realized not only did I have time, but I had a question. And one of the things that was on my personal bucket list was to go to the Library of Congress, to the Folklight Division, this somewhat mythical place for me where all these collections of folk music now reside. Great work from the 30s, the Lomaxes you've probably heard of, and others. But it's not the kind of place you can go walk into and say, show me something cool. It's a non-starter. But I realized I wanted to know more about this 1939 expedition in here in Mississippi. And I thought I knew a great deal, which is, I keep being proved wrong to my delight about that. And so I thought I would drive to Washington, I would get this great experience, which it's an incredible library to go into and do research in. Very knowledgeable people. And I would maybe come back with a photograph, put it on my wall, and I've had this little mission, and I can look at it when I play, and I feel great about it. So I, in fact, did go to Washington and discovered that this trip to Mississippi, and the field trip that Great Big Yam Taters documents, which happened in 1939, was incredibly well documented. I was able to photograph about over 600 pages of typewritten field notes explaining what happened, complete lyrics, character sketches, drawings of how one plays accompaniment to a fiddle by beating straws on it, genealogies of the sources, character sketches of the sources, photographs of the sources, in some cases diagrams of their floor plans of their houses, incredibly thorough field notes, the bulk of which is in the book. I wanted to make sure no one else needed to go digging to see these treasures. But they didn't have the photographs. They had contact sheets. Profoundly frustrating. But then I asked where they were, and they're in this building. And I've got family here, some of which is here today. And I thought, well, I'll combine that and go for a visit. Thinking, again, I would come down and get, a nice photograph of one of these fiddlers, put on my wall, and be proud, and I'm done. And when I got here and started going through the boxes and boxes and boxes of material from the 30s, I came across an immense amount of manuscripts of music notation and little squirrely little pieces of paper. Paper was very, very precious in 1936 when they did this work. Sometimes they ruled the lines themselves, and reading some of the accounts in the archive, some of the letters that went back and forth from the managers, they were going through immense grief just to try and get blank music books to write these tunes down in. It was people were poor, materials were hard. I found the photographs, but I also found the manuscripts, and it took me multiple trips to realize the wealth of material that was in the archive. It's somewhere north of 3,500 songs and tunes in the archive in manuscript form. Of that, 180 are fiddle tunes, and that's something I know a little bit about. And the songs, it was beyond my expertise, so I focused on the fiddle tunes. I snuck a few songs in because they seemed unique and distinct to Mississippi. And it slowly dawned on me that a book had chosen me to write it. It's not the other way around. I never thought of myself as a writer, but I've tried to do the project justice. So let's back up a little bit and let me tell you a little bit more about the field work in the 30s, and then I will play some of these tunes for you. 1935, we've all heard of Roosevelt and the Depression, and I imagine heads will nod when I say WPA, which was Works Progress Administration. Roosevelt had the idea that he did not know how to pull us out of the Depression, but he was just going to try one thing after another until something worked. If it worked, keep it. If it didn't, close it down. So they went through a batch of projects that were designed to put people back to work, the WPA being the longest lasting of them. In the WPA, which was a massive program, there were 4 arts projects. Art meaning painting, music, theater, and writing. And they were the tiniest part of the WPA, under 1% of funding and manpower. And they got well over 90% of the bad press. The anti-New Deal opposition was violently opposed to the idea that you would pay someone to write a play or act in a play or write a novel or do creative work. They found it profoundly offensive. Harry Hopkins, who was the chief administrator of the WPA, pointed out, heck, they're just people. They got to eat too. And the point of WPA was to put people to work and by being employed, keep their skills sharp and allow them to make money and therefore spend money and then start the wheels of turning the economy again. It didn't actually matter that they did anything. Now, it's important for all kinds of reasons that they do useful work, but that's not why the program was created. So, here in Mississippi, 1936, people on the ground. A lady named Jerome Sage was running the Federal Music Project, the state director, and she had managed to get over 130 people on the payroll and working. Big victory. About 9 of those people were performers, mostly classical. The bias of the Federal Music Project was distinctly about classical music. The director was going to use this as a tool to increase music appreciation across the country, train musicians, and pay classical performers to work. He wanted to further just that music. He was not interested in pop, folk, any other kind of music. But they had a program, so the program in Mississippi had to be mostly about teaching. There just weren't very many performance opportunities. So there was something over 100 music teachers hired and working early in 1936. I assume they were classical piano and violin teachers. I don't actually know. The record keeping in 36 is quite poor. So they're working. And they weren't competing with any music teachers that were already teaching, but they were teaching for free and working with community organizations. It went very well until there was an outbreak of polio in the state, and the state health department shut down public schools, shut down anybody teaching anything to cut down the possibility of transmission of disease. This went on for all through the summer and into the fall, apparently. Jerome Sage, heading up the Federal Music Project, now had a real political problem. An opposition that was gunning for her, people on the payroll, and nothing for them to do. Rather frantically, they grasped around and came up with the idea of researching folk music. which of course they were very bright people and they realized they knew nothing about it. So their first move was to go digging through all the state universities, looking for dissertations, looking for published books, looking for any information about folk music. And they came across a manuscript written by A.P. Hudson, who was teaching in Oxford at the University of Mississippi. In 1923, he had been teaching an English and Scottish ballads course at Ole Miss, and was rather stunned when one of his students said, "Oh, my parents sing those songs." And he followed up on it and went and visited Wendell's parents, and they sang for him, and he started a long process of collecting the lyrics to ballads. And he was very focused on that form, not play parties, not gospel, not old-timey, not topic songs, just ballads. He was, the impetus of early folk music research was coming out of English departments. They were interested in how the language changed over time. Mr. Hudson could neither read nor write music notation, and there was no recording technology in the state at that time. He persevered, used his grad students, and came up with a collection of ballads, which was published in 1936, Mississippi Folk Songs and Their Sources, the only other book on white folk music in the state prior to our book. It was an interesting book. Jerome Sage came across the manuscript of it before it was published, which was a real godsend for her. The great thing about the book was that it collected folk music, and it documented the people that the songs were collected from and where they lived. The downside was, of course, that you had all these songs with no music, so you couldn't perform them or learn them. Profoundly frustrating for a musician like myself. Jerome Sage came across this and went, "Great, I have a checklist. I can send the troops out, they'll go to these people, they'll collect the music, they'll recollect the lyrics, and I can employ them to do this." So that was the start. In the course of doing that, they found many other people, fiddle players in particular. Let's see. This is what some of them looked like. This is one of the ones that really startled me when I came across it in the archive. The tune is called John Butter and the Fat. It comes from a fiddle player, John Alexander Brown, who was on the cover of the book, who had tunes collected in manuscript form in 36, and in 1939, when they sent recording equipment down, they actually recorded him. So he's sort of the Rosetta Stone of the material in the book, and that's why he's on the cover. So they collected, as I said, more than 3,500 songs and tunes, and then in December they shut that program down and went back to teaching, and there's a pile of paper on Jerome Sage's desk that she couldn't do anything with. The papers went back and forth to Washington to prove that they'd actually done something for all the money that had been spent. And in 1939, early in the year, Charles Seeger, Pete Seeger's dad, came across these written tunes and was really excited about it. There's great music there. We have to get an expedition together and go find out more about it. And so they cobbled together resources from throughout the WPA. Mr. Herbert Halpert, a rather pasty-faced New Yorker, who had experience in running recording equipment. They recruited him because he was young, cheap, and experienced. They got a World War I ambulance for free, and then hired used WPA auto workers to completely refurbish it and make it roadworthy, ripping out everything in the back, putting in a space for a cot, shelves for equipment, recording equipment, photography equipment, canned food, anything people might need for traveling on very poor roads through hot summer in Mississippi. They went down for a month. They were joined there by Abbott Ferris, who was working for the Federal Writers Project, who took those gorgeous photographs I've mentioned and we'll show you some of. He also wrote character sketches, wrote down lyrics that weren't actually recorded with this then state-of-the-art recording equipment, a Presto disc cutter, all 300 pounds of it and its batteries, because there was no reliable electricity in the state at the time. They had to take their own. So they recorded in that summer about 400 performances, 147 of which are in the book and are fiddle and banjo songs. Oops, got a little ahead of myself. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk. Let's play a little bit. First piece is from John Brown, Ayuka, Mississippi. My next library show is in Iuka. I wanted to go to his home place and see who shows up. This is called Wolves A-Howling. He played the fiddle. Mr. John Hatcher sang on the recording. I'll show you his picture next. And this, remember that as late as the 30s, it wasn't that far back that Mississippi was the Wild West, a frontier, teeming with wildlife, including wolves. Them clouds are rising, can you hear them wolves are howling? They will get the poor little baby in the woods of starving. Woods all over, help me find my poor little baby in the woods of starving. I know they're howling, 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 oh, they're howling, can you hear them wolves a howling? In 1939, when Mr. Brown recorded that Wolves A-Howling, John Hatcher sang the lyrics, and I added a lyric or two from a ballad singer who was also recorded, Miss Burma Grissom. I'd like to play you John Hatcher's showpiece tune called Farewell Whiskey. John Brown said that little tinkly bit at the end of this tune I'm going to play is the sound of the whiskey pouring out of the bottle. play you a little, just a short snatch of John Butter and the Fat, because I showed you the notation. It's a quirky little tune. There's a CD, which you can see me about after this presentation if you're interested, that features the tunes from the manuscripts which haven't been heard otherwise since 1936. And Document has put out a 3 CD set of all the tunes in the second half of the book, all the original field recordings from 1939. Just wanted to mention it before I forgot. Oh, and all the CDs come with a guarantee. If you buy the CD and take it home and you don't like it, you mail it back to me, and I'll send you a CD that I hate. This is the Canoes, Tim, Lola, Enos, and Enos' wife, whose name I do not know tonight, this name, and Joanna. I met her and played some music with her. She's a little older than I am, which doesn't jive well with the photo, but she does look happy with that guitar. I'm going to play one of Enos' most interesting tunes called Poor Little Mary Sittin' in the Corner, and then follow it up with a children's play party song called Roll Them Similons. Not quite sure what a similon is. It might be some kind of nonsense version of persimmon. They do talk about rolling them, but it's a children's song. It's not necessarily supposed to make a lot of sense. It's designed to be sung and clapped to and provide the otherwise unaccompanied music for a simplified form of square dance that children would do, particularly in religious communities where this is known as the devil's box. This leads to dancing, which sometimes leads to alcohol, which sometimes leads to fraternization, all of which we need to avoid. I will point out that in my research on children's play party games, which are spread throughout the country, primarily the South, mostly in conservative religious areas where these are not liked. These games, probably 80% of them end in kissing your partner. I find this a little puzzling. So, Poor Little Mary Sitting in the Corner and Roll Them Similons. so sorry. Rolling someone, rolling round, rolling someone, rolling round, rolling someone, rolling round, all them pretty girls downtown. Rolling someone, rolling round, rolling someone, rolling round, rolling someone, rolling round, all the pretty girls downtown. Oh, Miss Mary, too late for Charlie, bound for Texas, I am so sorry. Rolling someone, rolling round, rolling someone, rolling round, rolling someone, rolling round, all the pretty girls downtown. Some of the most interesting for me as a fiddle player of the tunes in the collection are from an African-American player born sometime around the end of the Civil War in Carroll County, where my mom was born, in a little town called Teoc. Last trip to the archive, one of the people I spoke to here assured me that Teoc is not the Indian name that I always thought it was, but everyone down here knew that it was an acronym. And it's about 10 miles from Carrollton, the county seat, and I was told the acronym stands for the tough end of Carrollton. The source on this is a Mr. Alan Alsop, and the tune is a familiar title among old-timey fiddle players, but not the same tune. It's called Sweet Milk and Peaches, and I'm going to follow it up with another tune from Harrison County, from a fiddle player, J.E. Shoemaker, that I know absolutely nothing else about other than the name. So, Sweet Milk and Peaches and White Hat. I'm going to do a couple more for you, and then we'll take some questions. Lovely photo, isn't it? Miss Burma Grissom is over on the far side, and Miss Theodosia Long is here. There's another photo of her I'll try to find before we conclude. So these were ballad singers. The recordings are in the archive here and in Washington, and probably won't be reissued. The contemporary standards for listening to singers has gotten, well, shall we say the original recordings might be thought of as difficult listening? We think about that very differently these days, but they're good singers, and you can learn the tune from them. So this was an unaccompanied children's song from Miss Burma Grissom. It's called Old Morgan. Morgan's wife loved butter and cheese. Morgan drank away. Came a storm last Friday night. Blew old Morgan away. Blew old Morgan away. Went to hunt old Morgan up where he reckoned I found him. Way down yonder in the blackjack thicket with the buzzards all around him. Buzzards all around him. Plowing along the other day, plowing a barefoot horse. Had to stop every once in a while to beat them buzzards off. Beat them buzzards off. Get my gun, did not stay very long, for I get back saving my life and beat him up and gone, beat him up and gone. Morgan's wife loved butter and cheese. Morgan drank away. Came on storm last Friday night. Blowed old Morgan away. Blowed old Morgan away. Since she's up there, let's do a song called Mary Blaine. Comes from Theodosia Long's singing. She sang it a cappella, and Mr. Halpert asked her, "Where do you think this song is from?" And it was very sweet. She says, "Well, I think it must be from Ireland, because in the song they talk about, I wish I was in Ireland." Lovely sentiment. Misled me, and so I will play you my misled version. And then I did a little research and discovered in the Library of Congress there's multiple versions of sheet music of this from the 1880s, because it was probably the most popular of the minstrel show songs of the 1880s. So I'll sing it for you as I learned from her, and then I'll play you a bit from the sheet music, the other version of the melody. I wish I was in Ireland, sitting on my chair, in my hand a glass of wine, and by my side my dear. Then farewell, poor Mary Blaine, do take care of yourself, my dear. I'm coming back again. Your eyes were like the bright cornmeal, made out of flint and steel. And when she rolled them eyes at me, my gaze danced a reel. Then farewell, poor Mary Blaine, do take care of yourself, my dear. I'm coming back again. different about Mississippi tunes compared to, say, North Carolina or Virginia? And then the first answer is not much, with the same Southern techniques, standard techniques of how you pull the bow and phrase the tunes is similar. And for those of you that aren't players, bear with me for a moment. The basic form of fiddle tunes throughout the South, which are for dancing, is 8 measures of music with a tentative ending, followed by pretty much the same 8 measures of music with a really firm ending. You take that idea and do it again with a different melody, an A part, and a B part, and then you do it over and over until the dancers get tired and tell you to stop. So it's a very symmetrical form. 8, 16, and then 32. In Mississippi, not so much, and I think this is one of the defining characteristics for Mississippi fiddle tunes. Yes, there are some tunes that are shaped that way, but very few of them. Here, the music seems to be formed by individuals with very defined points of view, very strong individualistic characteristics. So they start a melody, and they keep going until they decide they're done, and they stop there, and then they repeat it the same. And then they do it again. And the chance that it's the same number of beats is not very good. So to illustrate this, I'd like to play 2 versions of a standard 8-bar and repeat tune, Fischer's Hornpipe, but I won't play it 8-bar and repeat because my head would explode if I tried to hold that in my head and these other 2 versions. I've tried and failed. Maybe one of these days. The first one is from Albus Massengale, and he used it as his contest-winning fiddle tune here at the state contest. It's fairly organized. It's 7 bars and 9 for the 2 parts. And then there's the one that I think is the high water mark, the best, most creative version of this that Mr. Stephen B. Tucker came up with. Again, Fischer's Hornpipe. Bear with me and I'll try to get through both versions. I think it's probably a good time to throw the floor open for some questions. Does anyone have any?
On this last piece, how is he playing with the other musicians? How could they follow him?
It's a solo piece. Almost all of the tunes recorded in 1939 are solo pieces, except for the Kanoi string band. And the Kanoi string band, the bulk of their tunes are 1-chord tunes. And his repeats are very odd.
So if another Mississippi fiddle player played that song, would it be different in terms of the
I would hope so. There's some bogus theories about how Celtic music wandered into the southern Appalachians and became isolated and became this cauldron that created southern music. And first of all, they weren't that isolated. There's an echo of that argument that I think sort of applies in Mississippi. While Mississippi was not isolated, what you did have was a low density of melody players in any given area. Now, those of us that play know that we sit down to play, we want to play a tune together. We will figure out some way to play the same number of measures, whatever it would be, and that would be our local version of the tune we have to play together. But if you don't get together with other melody players very often, you don't have to work that out. And so the distinct musical individuals that were documented in this state seem to have been distant enough from other players that they came up with their own versions, and they were rather distinctive. White Wing in Choctaw County is as distinctive as it gets. So yeah, that's the essential issue, is how do you play with other people? And basically, they're your family and you train them.
Tucker and Hatcher are Carroll County names.
Yes, but I believe, I'm blanking because of the number of these presentations I've done. Tucker, I believe, was from
Meridian. Meridian.
What? Which
Meridian.
guy? Meridian, near Meridian. Yeah. The fiddlers from Carroll County are Alan Alsop, the African-American from TI, Norman Smith. We know Mississippi John Hurt, of course, from there. Perhaps Gene Clarity. And then there's people in Winona just over the county line, like the Ray brothers. But, and there's one tune from someone named Long, something called Carve That Possum. And that's what I know of in Carroll County. Yeah, it's really funny. Carve That Possum is a well-known minstrel tune, and it's got a vocal chorus, and they're all singing Carve That Possum, and it's, you know, it's an instrumental song. And this tune is actually a very delicate little tune, and there are no lyrics, thankfully. And it's like that scene in Spinal Tap where the lead guitar player sits down at the piano and plays a gorgeous classical piano piece and then tells you the title, which I can't repeat here. It doesn't fit very well. Something else?
When these fellows came down from New York to record these guys, I was wondering, you know, some of these guys have a pretty good sense of humor. I was wondering if they might have been pulling their leg about some of the tune names. If you ever...
It's possible.
Yeah.
But Abbott Ferris was the one doing the interviewing, and he's from here.
Okay.
So there was little of that. I think more likely is that because of the expense of getting the discs and getting these fragile discs to Mississippi in time to be used, Halpert was hoarding them. And so there's 3 and 4 performances per side, 3.5 minute side. So what you get that makes the tunes, I question some of the tunes. I don't think very many elderly fiddle players in 1939 would collect their wits about a tune they may not have played in a while. And when someone put a microphone on and said, now play the tune and play it once through. If it had been me, about the 4th pass, I would have gotten it right and the way I thought the tune should go. But we don't have that. Now, I don't know if they thought about it and played it before they turned the recording device on, but these people had never been recorded before. They'd never seen anyone record it. So particularly in the case of Mr. Tucker, I wonder, particularly for that Fisher's Hornpipe I played you, I wonder if he was just not quite recalling it. There's a strong possibility of that. What would he have played 20 minutes later when he got warmed up? On the other hand, this is what we have. So it's gospel. It's really interesting. I mean, it took me a while to figure that one out because you have the other tune, the straight version in your head, and you're fighting it. These are rare cultural artifacts. We only have them. We can't take a time machine and go see what everybody is playing. We just have these little glimpses from around the state. And of course, people got missed. The thing about Alsop, and the reason I said I was excited, I forgot to explain the reason. African Americans playing in a white style, which was if you read the history, was overwhelmingly done. I mean, they were the jukebox. They were providing the music in much of the South, but they're not documented. When people began doing recording, if you were African American, they went for blues or spirituals. And if you were Anglo, they went for ballads. And the string band stuff fell through the cracks every which way. So if there were any distinct African American practices playing this music as opposed to some sort of jug band or blues, most of that's lost. So the little bit we have of Alan Alsop, the 14 tunes and fragments thereof, are fascinating because they're a little different. And so that's exciting news in my tiny world of fiddlers, because it's a little tiny bit of documentation that had not been known about widely.
Could you tell us something about your fiddles and what distinguishes, what leads you to choose one for a particular song versus another?
This one, made by a friend of mine, Nathaniel Rowan, is in standard violin tuning. G, D, A, E. This one, and I'm doing this as a raw kindness to you so you don't have to sit there and listen to me tune. I took the two bottom strings up one step, so it's A, E, A, E. And it rings, and it's a way of getting more volume if you're playing a square dance, because you can reach over and pop the other strings while you're going. So you can get a little more punch. And then this one, which I didn't get to because we're running short of time, but I'm going to play you a snatch anyway. One of those Alan Alsop tunes, a very meditative piece called Soap Suds Over the Fence. And I'm playing it because this is a viola that I've tricked out. It's an octave violin, so I can play cello parts. Here I am, the entire string section. Up, except lower. G, D, A, E. So that's the story with the fiddles.
Thank you.
In the book, there's an index that lists the various tunes by tuning as an aid to fiddle players, because once you read tune, you want to play all of those and then go play the other ones. I should...
So are you able to tell what the fiddle players of 36 and 39 were doing, or what kinds of fiddles that they have just from listening to them?
Well, we can't listen to the ones from 39 because they're manuscript only, and the manuscripts are somewhat schematic. When I spent about a year trying to figure out how to record this, trying to turn it back into music, because a manuscript, particularly if it's not really intense manuscript, doesn't tell you a lot. And so I have to rely on current performance practices and what I know about Mississippi fiddling to get it at least listenable, enjoyable. And I posted the MIDI files, the sheet music playing itself, on my website for free download. And I have bookmarks which I'll give to everybody where they can actually hear every tune in the book if you track down the various recordings and what's on my website. When we were transcribing, making notation from these actual recordings, yes, you can usually tell what the tuning is because you hear the open strings ringing. You can usually tell what key they're in because, again, where the open strings ring in the path of the melody. In most of the recordings, which are fairly clear, you can tell a great deal about when the bow changes directions, how many notes you finger before the bow direction changes. If you're a scholar of this, if you're a player, you can hear it. It's subtle, but you can hear it. We notated that in the book, but we were kind of cautious about it because, again, your ear can be fooled. A word about the second half of the book, where we were working from these recordings. My co-author, Stephen Tiosto, and I went through at least 4 passes on each tune, painstakingly arguing over the merits of any note or slur or how we were going to convey this information. It's actually a bizarre art form to give enough to give someone who has some idea what the tradition's like, enough information to get very, very close to the recording or help as an aid to decipher the recording to be able to play it yourself without overwhelming the player with a swarm of black notes that are unreadable. It takes quite a bit of concentration to try to hit the sweet spot, and I'm very proud of our transcriptions. I think they do give the maximum amount of information without totally overwhelming you, particularly since the tunes can be heard when there are recordings. Stephen took the lead on that. He's an amazing player, but it was a process that we needed 2 sets of ears to do. One person would be misled by their fixed ideas about how it needs to be played from your own experience. So I think we did a really good job. I'm very proud of the work that Stephen and I did. More questions? We got another couple minutes. Wow, that coffee must be appealing.
Music for sale here, books for sale here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.